Lift your head, feel the pride, we've come so far. A voice is strong, shining bright like a guiding star.
Hello and welcome to NJGPOD, the official podcast of New Journal Guide. I'm your guest host, Tony Holobyte, and today we have a special episode featuring a distinguished figure in journalism. Joining us is Leonard Colvin, who served as the chief reporter for NJG since 1987, and now dedicates his time to preserving our rich history through the NJG archives. We'll delve into his remarkable career, explore memorable stories, and discuss the significance of archiving in today's digital age.
Our legacy will sing and never lie. From the roots to the crown, we've grown strong.
So we're gonna go ahead and start. Matter of fact, if you could introduce yourself and tell me about who you are and pretty much how you got here with New Journal Guide.
Well, I guess that would be the first two questions. Right now, I am Chief Reporter Emeritus since I retired in November of 2023. I don't know anybody in this country that holds such a distinguished title, but I am very respectful of Ms. Andrews granting me the ability to wear it, and I do so with great pride. I guess the first question you wanted to know is sharing my journey to the guide.
Yes.
What I've been. My family. There are a lot of readers in my family, and reading is basic. Definitely is fundamental, and especially when my mother, who used to work at a restaurant at night, she would bring the discarded newspapers home that the white customers would leave on the counter or whatever, and she would bring them home, and I would read through them. Of course, there was always books around my house, and my older brothers, they had books and novels, and my mother always read books and novels in the newspaper, and my father, who could not read, but he loved just sifting through his Playboy magazines. So that is how I got involved in reading. And I used to be punished by my teachers because while she was up there instructing, I would sneak off to the library and read. Sometimes during that time when teachers could put a hand on you, I would be beaten back to the classroom because I guess I was ahead of the classwork she was presenting. So I wanted to go and drift off into the Encyclopedia Britannica or some other book that I found fascinating. But I think what really got me into journalism was Watergate. And every evening, there was only three channels that people in Southeast Arkansas could access via television: CBS, NBC, and ABC. And we always watched the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And when Watergate hit, and of course Richard Nixon was not, my parents were not fans of Richard Nixon. So any little dirt that the press could dig up on him and his ability to get out of that little web of deception that he was creating, it fascinated me. So I recall sitting in the summer of 73 or 74 when the Watergate hearings were going on. The kids would be out playing in the yard, and I'm sitting there before the television looking at the Watergate hearing like it was a serial soap opera. So that pretty much got me involved when I saw the Dan Rathers and the Robert Pierports and Cronkite sort of break the story wide open and how they pieced it together, And then, of course, after that, I started writing letters to the editor to my local newspaper. And as you know, small black neighborhoods in most southern towns, they were good examples of environmental racism in that all of the plants and the dirt that came from the plants usually fell upon us. So my city, Stuttgart, Arkansas, was the rice and dust capital of the year. So when they harvested rice, when they milled the rice, the hulls would come off and they would just blow them out into the air, and it would blanket the houses and the cars and the streets.
Wow.
So one day I was looking at a story on the CBS Evening News about the EPA. Nixon, strangely, created the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And at that time, the federal government was trying to get factories to put filters on their factories. So I'm thinking, maybe why can't these rice mills do that here in Stuttgart? So I wrote a letter to the editor describing the situation, and then requesting that these big rice mills put filters on their exhaust fans that was pulling all this dust out into our neighborhood. And if they refused to do so, I said black people should boycott buying rice. Mm. And I sent the letter off, and one day I was out in the front yard playing with my dog and my buddies, and my mother came to the door, and she was, upset. And it was one of those looks on her face that she wasn't upset about anything that happened in the house or what we had did, but something else. The exterior was impacting her. And she said, "The mayor wants to talk to you. What did you do?" "I don't know, Mom. I'll find out." So he got on the phone, he apologized, and he was very nice, and he understood the situation, and he said, "We will try to do better." He probably lied, and said I had been trying to get them to do better over there, especially in your neighborhood, and asked me how I was doing in school and all that stuff. And, he hung up, and Mom said, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, he liked the letter I wrote him." "What letter?" So she read to the letter, and she said, "Okay." I thought my daddy would kill me. And he just said, "Good job," and went on and got his supper.
Wow.
But I got hooked. I knew the power of the word, well thought out protests and presentation. So I was hooked, and I started writing letters every week. And then I went to college, and first went to a all-white, mostly majority white school. I didn't pan out there. Things were moving too fast for me. So I went to the state HBCU, University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and they didn't have a formal journalism program, but they put me in speech and dramatic arts, and with an emphasis on communications. So I was taking mostly arts courses, writing courses, English courses, and whatever opportunities that were possible for writing. Plus, there was a newspaper on campus, so I exercised my use of that. I would write 3 or 4 stories. I would write a sports story and see what the students were doing on campus. So people complained when I was working for the Guide that I was writing 3 or 4 stories a week, but I had built up that habit, because there was always something going on. And when you're a weekly newspaper, you have an opportunity to put things together, to snoop around and dig up stuff. So on that campus, there was always something going on. And then after that, I got my first job at the Pine Bluff Commercial, which was the dominant white newspaper in South Central Arkansas. And I was a regional reporter and couldn't drive. So I had to teach myself on the fly how to drive a car. So I remember the first assignment I had going out of town, I had to go pick up one of my buddies from campus, come ride with me. Why? Because I can't drive. Where are you going? I'm going somewhere. So I can remember going down Highway 79, going to my assignment. Let me back up a little bit. I paid for someone to teach me how to drive, but I never collected on it. But 2 or 3 weeks before that incident I'm describing, when I'm going out on my first assignment, the guy gave me some rudimentary lessons on driving. Okay, so I could keep the car on the road, and I was going about 15 miles an hour around about 5 o'clock when when traffic was picking up. So I'm pretty sure I blocked traffic for at least 5 miles. So we did make our destination. But after that, I, built my skill in driving and reporting regionally out in Southeast Arkansas was quite interesting because you saw you saw some of the poorest Black communities, you saw some of the richest Black history, some of the most interesting stories centered around agriculture and politics and whatever. So I worked there for about a year or so, and Mr. Reagan's recession hit, and they had to lay off somebody. And so since I was the last one in, I was the first one that, when things pick up, we'll see you. So I sat on my sister's couch for about 2 months, and I decided to go into the military. And I went into the Navy and got stuck out in Cuba for 3 years. But it wasn't so bad. I loved it because I could do my work in the military and also at night write for the base newspapers. They had a very active sports program, so I would walk around the baseball field and cover 4 or 5 games and then the next morning you would see them in the base newspaper, and my commanding officer called me and one day, "Is this you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, damn, keep it up." So I did, and I started reporting on sports and other little things that was going on down in the Guantanamo base before they turned into a prison and now an internment camp for immigrants, thanks to Mr. Trump. But after that, I came to Norfolk and got on a ship for about a year or so. And I couldn't stomach that anymore. Couldn't stomach the military. I could have re-enlisted, but I said no. So I got off the ship and stayed in Ocean View in Norfolk. And for about 4 months, I sat around and grew a beard and watched soap operas and drank beer until I thought it was about time to go back to work. And a friend of mine told me one night at a bar I was at, go over to the Journal Guide, So I kept calling, trying to get an interview with the publisher, but that wasn't going. Nothing seemed to be pushing forward. So one day, I bought a friend's car and I went over and put on my necktie and whatever, and I sat in the lobby and I asked the lady who was at the desk, "When is Ms. Andrews coming in? I have a 10 o'clock appointment with her." "Oh, she'll be in. Oh, you're here at 10 o'clock. I said, "Yes, I am." So Ms. Andrews came busting through, and she said, "Who are you?" "I'm your 10 o'clock appointment." "Oh, okay. Yes, I'll be with you in a moment."
You never had an appointment.
I wanted a job. And at that time, she had taken over the newspaper. She came in as the publisher's secretary. Then she went to the editor, and then she became publisher. And she was redoing everything because the paper was under considerable stress in bankruptcy, and there was nobody in the newsroom except me and the production manager, the woman who put together the paper, and a guy who did the darkroom work. And so she hired me. She gave me a test story to write, and bam, the rest is history. And I went in there in this huge newsroom, and I was the only reporter. And there was Miss Shamiko Brooks. That was her name. She did all the layout and everything. And I remember the first night we put out a paper, it took us seemingly, we started around 8 o'clock that morning. We didn't finish until maybe about 10 or 11. We were exhausted. But it seems like that Tuesday routine of putting out that paper was, it was hell in one degree, but also it was kind of fun and challenging, especially when equipment would break down and news would break at the last minute. It was quite interesting. So that's how I arrived at the Guide. I hope I didn't go over and.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack there.
It's a lot.
From and I got 2 questions for you. How old were you when you got this apology from the mayor?
I think I was about 14 years old.
Wow, that is impressive.
Yeah, I was 14. So 13 or 14. Yeah. But I would borrow one of my mother's friend's typewriters and type out my letters to the editor. And I was quite a ravenous reader. I was reading college level stuff when I was 10 years old.
Wow. That's impressive.
So, yeah.
So and so that gave you the bug to
Oh, that gave me a bug. That gave this little nerd a bug, something I can do. I
uh,
saw the power. If the mayor would call me, oh, oh
wow.
shoot, no, you know.
That gotta be exciting there. And
Oh yeah, yeah. But
and
I knew there was danger, and I
yeah.
don't know how much heat my parents never. I don't think the white folks ever gave them any heat. My mother was very assertive too when it came to white people. Uh, but I don't know if they had any problems with that because she worked at this cafeteria, this restaurant where all of the big name people in that city, the lawyers, the doctors, lawyers at noontime, they were in the city cafe having lunch,
Okay.
eating food that these black women uh, prepared for them. And my mother she was the head cook, and so they would always see her back there working. You know, Miss Georgia.
Okay. So
And
she won the city through the stomach, huh?
well, you know, at that time, black people were seen as just functionaries. They were cooks and janitors and all of that. They were important to the degree that they could prepare good food and do what they needed, the rudimentary jobs that they had to survive. But so far as their grand importance, I don't know. I don't, you know,
Wow.
you
Well,
know. But my mother was well known as the cook in that, you know, that restaurant, that main restaurant on Main Street in my little city,
wow.
and
Well,
all the other black ladies that were her neighbors.
let's get back to the journalism. Um, Reflecting on your tenure since 1987,
Uh-huh.
what significant changes do you observe in journalism, especially in the black press?
Compared to now.
Yeah, compared to now.
Oh well, at that time, the black press had its heyday. The Journal Guide started in 1900. The archives that I'm working with started from 1916 and 2003, and that was the heyday from the 1920s up until the 1960s. That was the heyday of the black press because the white press didn't care about the black community unless there was a riot, some black man raped a white woman, or Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball. So it was up to the black press to assert a word on politics, economics, every issue. The Journaling Guide started out maybe 14 pages initially and grew into multiple editions. They have a national edition, a local edition, a peninsula edition. It was huge. It would be 73 pages as a weekly, and
Wow.
it covered everything. It covered national politics, even the little crazy stories about husbands killing wives and then themselves. But my goodness, they covered everything: history, um,
73 pages.
politics, everything. They even had social pages, you know, and they did it in a way that made black people buy the Journaling Guide because uh, I remember now working with the archives. I put the address to where I'm living right now in the Lindenwood section of Norfolk on Granby Street. I put in my address, and the lady who stayed at this house was the social butterfly in Lindenwood and in Huntersville, and she was always having something. There was always a garden club. There was always the fraternities. There was always the parties and the marriages and all of that. The way they produced that newspaper, black people could not help from picking it up because it was about them
Wow.
at their best. Okay, and no worst. There was news about black people owning banks and businesses and the teachers. You know, even when the public housing communities came up, there was always news about what was going on in Tidewater Park and Tidewater Gardens. You know, the educational programs they had with the kids who made grades and all of that. It was fascinating, you know, because it was designed because the Virginian Pilot did not cover the black community. None of the white newspapers, to any degree, covered the black community. It was up to the black press to cover the black community. up until the mid 1960s when integration happened, and white newspapers had basically exhausted their basic consumer base. So they said, "Oh, well, we might as well start covering Negroes too. Might as well start covering Black people." Okay. So they started. I know Glenn Mason, who writes sports. It started with the sports. They started writing sports, and then they crossed over to other things in the Black community. It was hard for them to even get into the Black community, the social things and whatever, the economics, unless the city was doing something in the Black community, because they had never they never walked down that path into the Black community to know what was going on there. So yeah, and that is when the Black newspapers across the country saw an erosion in their readership. They never lost influence as far as writing, because there was always a lot of stuff to write about Black people. But they had to compete with white newspapers and broadcast and white magazines. So by the time I reached the Guide, it was in a transitional stage. It could have folded. Even Miss Andrews will tell you we could have folded in the moments because of the pressures on her keeping that place together and the economics and all of that. But it was through sheer determination that if she found loyal people to endure all of the hardships that went on in keeping our newspaper going until we got a sort of a smooth patch, and it's where it is today because of that determination, because Black newspapers were being edged out, pushed aside.
You're listening to NJGPOD, the official podcast for the New Journaling Guide, where we bring you stories that matter, past and present. We'll be right back in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor.
New Journaling Guide, we've raised the bar. In the ink, in the print, our truth is found.
For over a century, the New Journaling Guide has been the heartbeat of Hampton Roads, delivering news that shapes our community and resonates beyond. As the South's oldest Black-owned newspaper, we chronicle stories that matter, from local triumphs to national milestones, celebrating the rich tapestry of the African-American experience, history, present, and future in one subscription. Stay informed and empowered. Subscribe today at thenewjournalingguide.com.
Welcome back to NJGPOD, the official podcast of New Journaling Guide. We're going to jump right back in with Leonard Colvin, Chief Reporter Emeritus, who's talking about his career and how he works with the New Journaling Guide archives. So which stories or events that you've covered stand out as particularly impactful or memorable?
I don't think there's any one story that stands out. I think that's covering all of the uniqueness of Black politics, Black economics, Black culture is unique, because white people, even though they were covering it, they could not cover it like a Black reporter. I consider myself a Black reporter because I would just let people talk and garner what I needed relative to emphasizing the Blackness of the economic story, the political story, how Black people were oppressed, even in, were done in by city redevelopment, pushed out of neighborhoods, how they were denied capital to expand for their businesses, or when they did have businesses, they were always under the gun, suspect they were always an air of suspicion and inferiority, not only from white people, but from Black people.
Yeah.
How Black people built Black hospitals, how they built a Norfolk State, how they built a Hampton University, how they built all of these institutions. And because they were so successful at building their institutions in segregation and pushing for progress for integration, that sort of undermined everything they had built, including the black newspaper. So when I got there, everything was sort of regressing to a certain degree. Black people were still pushing, but you saw the demise of the black newspapers. Norfolk State the president of Norfolk State, Dr. Harrison B. Wilson, a great man, and he and I used to sit and talk candidly after every academic year, him always talking about always being underfunded, because they never thought that Norfolk State would last that long anyway. And he was always stealing from Peter to play Paul and Pauline. How businesses like SMA, System Management American, which was headed by, I forgot his name right now, but it'll come to me, Herman Valentine. That if you stand in the entrance of MacArthur Center right now, right, the MacArthur Mall,
yeah,
there used to be a building there, 10-story building there, but it was a Sears, but it was called System Management American, and they used to create computers for shipboard use, because if you're on the ship, if it's a small board, it rocks a lot. So a lot of equipment would be damaged by rocking and by the atmosphere of the ship. But he built a multi-million-dollar company. But somehow some of his underlings undermined him. And when I interviewed Herman Valentine, I thought it was the most monumental thing in the world that this black man commanded this huge footprint in downtown Norfolk, a 10-story building. And it was such a disgrace that, when everything, the courts were after him and the federal government he went down so quickly. And that was, and if we're talking about other stories, black people still trying to change the political system. I remember the fight over Norfolk had an at-large system, whereas, if you had 3 seats on city council open in an election year, the persons who got the 3 top number of votes in that election, they would be on council. And black people managed to get only 2 black persons on council via that system. Although in 1968, due to the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, there were stories about black people being elected for the first time since Reconstruction. Wow. You look back at Reconstruction and all the progress that black people made, slowed down by Jim Crow segregation, but there was a resurgence starting in 1955 with the Montgomery boycott and the emergence of the modern civil rights movement with Dr. King. All of that in 1968 and 69, they saw black people for the first time in a century get on city councils in Norfolk and Chesapeake. It took Virginia Beach a while. It was amazing, the political change that black people had. But there was always, it seems like the economics of black people were still lagging. Church Street, I remember the stories I did on Church Street, thanks to an activist by the name of Joe Rose, who wrote a series of articles called The Rape of Church Street, because at that time, when I got here, Church Street was it was blighted, it was raggedy, and I remember meeting Mr. Rose down there one day. He said, "I want to show you our history. I want to show you Church Street." So when I was driving at that time, I pulled up on Church Street, and I got out of the car, and I said, "Well, damn, why would they want to save this?" Because it was tattered, and there were very few businesses open down there. So he sat down and told me about the history of Church Street. First, it was Jewish owned. All those buildings along Church Street were Jewish owned. And the Jewish merchants asked the city of Norfolk to fix up Church Street, which was adjacent to Huntersville, fix up that area too. The city refused. So the Jewish merchants said, "Okay, you won't fix up Church Street. We'll just take over Granby Street." So all the Jewish merchants migrated to Granby Street. So that's why from the 30s, 40s, and onward, you saw all of those businesses along Granby Street and in downtown Norfolk with Jewish names on them. What was left on Church Street was either leased to or bought by black people, and that's how black people in Norfolk created their Black Wall Street. That was our main business quarter. They had all kinds of merchant stores down there. They had theaters that the Jewish owners left and said, okay, you go ahead and run it. And I think if you think about it, the only building other than the churches on Church Street that were built by Black hands, the only main brick and mortar building built by Black people on Church Street was the Attic Theater in 1990.
Yeah, the Attic Theater. But
that still shows you how Black people were still pushing, despite racial segregation. Black people said, "Hey, look what we did. Look what we did." But then again, over time, integration and whatever caused us to abandon that which had carried us for so long, our businesses, our schools, or whatever. So that was interesting too, just seeing how what was once a symbol of pride and economic progress of Black people, how it was sliding, how it was eroding. And people talk about the St. Paul's redevelopment area. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no.
Yeah, well, it's down in downtown. People, if they know about the St. Paul's redevelopment area, that area from City Hall on over towards Virginia Beach Boulevard, that whole Black corridor, Huntersville, whatever, that area has been redeveloped several times. And this is only the recent reincarnation of that St. Paul's quadrant, that area right there on St. Paul's Boulevard, down from going north from City Hall and the school administration building. At that time, that area was going, sliding into blight because they had built a shopping center and whatever, but it went down. I call it urban decay for varying reasons. Downtown Norfolk was being killed by the malls. There was nobody. There was businesses going in still in downtown Norfolk. Very few Black businesses. In fact, no Black businesses down there in downtown Norfolk proper. But there were still Black businesses like Bishop Willis's radio station. He had his building down there. The Black doctors had built. The Black doctors at Norfolk Community had gotten together and put their little nickels and dimes together, and they built several Black professional buildings. So they were still trying to hold things together, but because Black people were still abandoning our economic contribution to our community, they went down too. So I got here, and downtown Norfolk looks quite different then than it does now. So, and I think if you ask about the stories that I'm more proud of, anytime I could do a story that revealed some of these disparities or put light on the importance of a Black hospital or a Black university or some Black person trying to create an enterprise or some Black person trying to get other Black people in a neighborhood like Park Place to see the value of what they have and reinvent some sort of pride to move forward. Instead of living in dysfunction, owning dysfunction, let's see if we can improve ourselves. All those stories I did. There's no one story, but just showing how Black people sort of fought, and resisted even our own community giving up on ourselves. Those stories were the ones that gave me pride.
Were there any assignments that profoundly influenced your perspective on the community or on journalism? Oh no,
well, it was only me, so I could do whatever I wanted.
Anything can like change your profoundly change your perspective. Like wow,
well,
I look at
those stories that I'm telling you about. Because when I was in Southeast Arkansas, I knew about my alma mater. But I didn't know anything about Hampton University. I didn't know anything about Norfolk State. I didn't know about the rich legacy of how all those institutions were created. Just looking at how Norfolk State was created from being in the basement of the old YMCA building to the old being a part of in the basement of the old DePaul Hospital, where that massive mail distribution center sitting in Norfolk existed, to where it is now and evolving into what it is now. That is amazing.
I never knew that.
Okay. Or how Booker T. Washington High School was created at a time when white folks did not want to give black people money and funding to build schools. They did it on their own. They did it on their own. And how even when, after years of, when Booker T was created, and then in the early 1960s, when the building was falling apart, they wanted, black people wanted a new school. Okay? The city said, okay, we'll give you a new school, but it won't be at Park Avenue and Princess Anne Road. We're going to move it to 8600 Tidewater Drive. You know where 86 Tidewater Drive is? Northside Park. Not only were they going to take the historic, that school that black people built on their own, you know, with a little city assistance, but they was always behind the Murrays and the Granby High School. They were going to take that school out of its historic footprint, put it somewhere else, because white people were afraid that white people would not go to that school. Okay, black people pushed back hard and got their school, because not only were they going to relocate it to the northern part of the city, they were going to change the name of it from Booker T. Washington High School to just Washington High School, erasing all of their history. Wow. Okay, you talk about the people who like Joe Rose and Herbert Collins and all the old politicians and Mr. Paul Riddick, who just got off council, people who when they did get on council, when they did have power, their voices were neutralized because they were too radical. They were speaking out too forceful. Mr. Riddick can tell you this, and if anybody you want to do a blog interview on, do Paul Riddick, because he will tell you some history. Their voices were muted because they were too radical. They were pushing too hard for black progress, pushing too hard for city investment in the black community. You know, Paul Riddick voted, if they were 8-1, he was always that one against it, because he always knew that whatever they voted for was not in the best interest of black people.
Well, so speaking of black, what are some challenges you face as a black journalist, and how did you navigate through them?
Having resources. having resources, you know.
What are the challenges that you face?
Yeah, just having resources, having I always found a way of getting around. Even after we lost use of the car that the company had, I always found a way of getting around, either me and a photographer or whatever. But having resources to research stuff, you know, there was always, and also the challenge of being trusted. I had to develop a way of getting black people who were afraid to death of white journalists, who, no matter what black people were doing, no matter how much of a disparity existed, there was always some sensationalism that sort of turned against that black cause. I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want to sensationalize anything, nor did I want to bring out all the negative. So I would just, as I said, I would just let people talk. And once they built, and I would write stories where I would leave out a lot of things that would hurt politicians, educators, individuals who were fighting a cause, that would hurt them. I kept a lot of secrets to myself, because I knew that if I wrote certain stories in a certain way, the power structure would come down on them, or black people were scared and abandoned that particular cause.
I
did everything to move that issue forward and not destroy it. Okay, so that's why they would tell me some extraordinary stuff. I said, well, this is just between me and you and the FBI and the CIA listening, you know, because you never know. And, you know, it was interesting that I had sources that the white press, the pilot, never had. So when I did stories and they would go, well, who did you talk to? Or how'd you get this story? I said, I'll get back with you. I never called her that
Interesting.
because that was my source. People would call me with story ideas. Once they figured that we knew what we were doing and they trusted us, oh, we got a boatload of stories that, only they knew only a black newspaper could do and could do it right. Yes. People complained about us capitalizing black.
Wow.
Okay. It is a specific designation of race in this country. If y'all want to play that game, we're going to capitalize it. There was some people who got aim recovery started calling African Americans. Why are y'all doing all the black stories? We are a black newspaper. Nobody's covering this story.
Yeah. Well, can you just discuss a time when your reporting made a tangible difference in the community? Like when it really made a
I
impact?
would say the whole time I was there, and the whole time the guy has managed to keep his doors open. It made a difference because we were reporting black stories. Didn't give a flip about what was happening in Norfolk State and it's being underfunded. They didn't care about black neighborhoods being undervalued, or the CRA is called the Community Reinvestment Act. And if banks get a dime from any neighborhood or any zip code, they're supposed to invest in a neighborhood in as loans, or at least just having an office or an outlet or branch in a black neighborhood. The Republican Party killed that. And that's why I guess from the late 1980s or whatever, you didn't see any black banks in the black neighborhoods. You didn't see much black investment in the black neighborhoods. But when we started making a point of it with the city and all of that, that's when they were trying to make some meager investment because they knew that we were on that story. We were talking about it. Nobody else talked about it because nobody understood that the idea of the CRA. About Booker T. Washington High School. They still, as of this day, they are still considering keeping that institution, that historic high school, open. But when we started getting the alumni groups talking about the disparities that existed at Booker T. Washington High School, the mold and the air conditioning system and all the disrespect the city gave to that school when they designated it an art school, because all these schools have different curriculum concentrations. The city said, oh yes, Booker T. Washington will be the art school, but they never invested in it. So in the last 2 or 3 years, they have been, with us writing and raising hell about it, and just talking over the phone with people who were in the know, they have been investing in their school significantly. Wow. Also, the whole idea about, and it didn't happen, but when they were doing the St. Paul's redevelopment, the lack of black developers in that project. There was no black person to any significance. There is now. Bruce Smith, I think, he has a development coming up. But there were no black people involved in developing anything because black people were not prepared. They knew that the destruction and demolition, the rehabilitation of the St. Paul area was going to take place. They knew all those public housing communities were going to come down. But when the first phase came, which is almost finished, there was no black person that had a development company available and ready to go do business. And we did a story on that, and people were scratching their head. Well, where are they? So I said, y'all are just not ready. And they knew that. They had to admit that. Now they're trying to do better. But when you're talking about black contractors, black developers or black contractors, I think the city is now serious about that because black people were called flat-footed at that time. They weren't ready. Nobody had any truck to carry dirt. Nobody had any money to hire people to shovel dirt or to build anything. So I think this next phase of redevelopment, and it is coming, hopefully black people will be more aware. We did stories about Norfolk, especially in Chesapeake and Virginia Beach. Norfolk sort of dodged us on the number of Black people receiving contracts to provide services and goods to the cities. Some of the stories we did got Virginia Beach turned around, got Chesapeake turned around a little bit, and Portsmouth is probably the most responded the most because they had the most energetic and angry political leaders on council to push it forward. Black contracts. I don't think the city of Norfolk to this day will give you a report as to the percentage of contracts, procurement contracts, let to minority vendors providing goods and services to the city. Portsmouth does, to the degree that Virginia Beach does. I have to check on it. But those are some of the things, dealing with the disparities in our communities. When, especially as an old privately owned apartment complex in Portsmouth called Fairwood Homes. And there are always some heroes. And I forgot the name of this lady. It'll come to me, though. But she was a heavy-set, beautiful Black woman, and she was fighting for the tenants of that area because the city had made an agreement just to tear the place down. But she fought, with the city and with lawyers that she could get free to keep that place open long enough so people would have some place to go.
You're listening to NJGPOD, the official podcast of New Journal Guide.
Voices strong, shining bright like a guiding star. Built with love, bound by truth, it's who we are. New Journal and Guide, we've raised the bar. Mighty hearts in our chest, we stand tall. Through the storm, through the night, we won't fall. Every step, every breath, we